Welcome to another episode of The Writer's Dream. You can find us on Facebook, where you will see many authors talking about how they write, how they publish, and how they market their books. You can also find us on YouTube. We have about, I would say now, close to 200 authors, most of them local. If you're a reader or a writer, you will find many writing tips, and you'll find many wonderful books to read. So if you have a question about The Writer's Dream, you can message me on Facebook. If you'd like to be on the show, you can do it the same way. We're also here at ltveh.org, and where else are we? Yes, we are on Cablevision Channel 20, Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock. So we're all over the place, and I think you'll enjoy the show. Today's guest is Deborah Burns, and Deborah Burns is an author, but she was also the Chief Innovative Officer, I'm sorry about that, for some magazines that you might recognize the titles for: Elle Girl, Elle Decor, Metropolitan Home, and Elle Global. And I think this is going to show up in one of our questions. Her book is Saturday's Child, which is a memoir, and I would like to read a quote that she put in the book, and this is going to give you an indication of what this book is about. The quote is from Carl Jung. It says, "Every mother contains her daughter in herself, and every daughter her mother. And every mother extends backwards into her mother and forwards into her daughter." So,
good morning, good afternoon, and it is quite a quote. Yes.
Yes, and those of us who are mothers, I think in terms, I don't have a daughter, but I am a daughter.
Yes,
and
every woman is a daughter.
Yes.
And every daughter has a story. Some are just a little more complicated than others.
Right, exactly. So tell us about your book, Saturday's Child.
So this is the memoir of my unconventional mother, who I idealized. I was an only child and basically spent a lifetime dancing around the pedestal of an otherworldly, beautiful goddess. And I say I worshipped her because I did. We had a relationship where we never fought, and I was always awaiting her arrival. The book is called Saturday's Child. I was born on a Saturday, the old nursery rhyme, and Saturday's child works hard for a living, which I've done. Thank you for the introduction. But my perception, my secret, was that I felt I had to work hard for her love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the book was published in my own midlife, 25 years after my mother's death. Mm-hmm. And even though she had been gone for so long, she was always still in there, kind of like an invisible pedestal now, but she was in there for me.
I think our mothers are there.
Yeah.
I tried to convince somebody of that once. I just said, your mother's always with you. And they looked at me as if I had two heads. I said, no, they are. Just listen.
Mm-hmm. But for me, I think there was something unresolved as I had gotten older and lived my own story without her being in it and central to it, and married and had children of my own. I was at a point in my life when I got hit with the notion to write the book where I needed to move forward. My whole media world was changing. Again, those were magazines. The whole world imploded, and the Chief Innovation Officer job and that whole livelihood and foundation I had was breaking apart.
Why?
Basically, digital entered and accelerated, and the print world really didn't know what to say next. The whole business model of digital is very different from print, and it's not the same as print. So you had empires that were founded on advertising revenue, and it just was shifting around the time there was an economic collapse in the earlier 2000s.
Right.
And everything combined, and it spelled disaster. And so I knew that I had to reinvent myself, but I felt something was stuck in there. And I got hit with this notion to write a book when I was on a trip to London with my daughter, and looking at portraits of unconventional women from the 18th century. And there was something about being in that room and looking at all of those women, and it was like a thunderbolt, like a scene from The Godfather when Michael saw Apollonia for the first time. And I said, I have to learn more about these women, and I have to write about my mother. And that began a creative journey that really was 7 years long to get to this point.
I often wonder, I love history, and I love historical novels, and almost always I'll pick the ones where there are exceptional women. And when you consider the culture that is, I guess, Western culture, and maybe even other cultures as well, but I'm more familiar with Western culture, is that you wonder about women and how they were able to be restrained so much, and only certain figures seem to come out.
Sure.
I think that's a fascinating story.
Well, it is. When you look at these women, some of the women I saw were Mary Wollstonecraft, Olympe de Gouges from France. They were all European because I was in London at the National Portrait Gallery. And when you began to research these women, I mean, you hear about glass ceilings today. Those women were scaling concrete walls to climb out, and yet there was something about them. After a lot of soul searching that I had done in the year prior, that just touched a chord, and it just set me down a new path.
So did you think of yourself in relation to them, or your mother in relation to them?
No, there was something about their unconventionality for their time. My mother was nothing like Mary Wollstonecraft, but there was something about how they overcame being held back and designed their own life that was familiar to me, because that's something that my mother did. She crafted a life that suited her. It might
Can you describe that life?
Sure. As I mentioned, she was otherworldly beautiful. Mere mortals could not attain that level. She looked like a
Mighty
Rita
Aphrodite.
Hayworth. Yeah, Aphrodite, Venus, Rita Hayworth, when she woke up in the morning, and then it just got better from there. And when I came along, being stuck in a world of domesticity and washing out diapers and pins was not in line with the vision that she had for herself, being so remarkable in many ways.
Did she work?
She did later on, very unhappily. My father is part of this story too. You know, at its heart, every writer has to say, what story am I telling? And I'm telling a mother-daughter story, but I could never tell her story without his. And my father was the product of a relatively famous Italian family from years ago. His older brother was Tony Canzoneri, that was my maiden name, and Tony Canzoneri was the lightweight champion of the world. And he was a creative, the baby of the family. He loved nightlife and music. He was a lyricist. And my mother met him as a very young girl. And their life was not a happy one together, and it was filled with disappointment on her part and on his, even though he remained madly in love. So that work piece she did later on, but she envisioned a life for herself with him that wasn't playing out according to what she had envisioned or predicted. And so when I came along, I was full of probably too many demands for mediocre things. And she got her husband's, my father's, two older spinster, word from the day, plump sisters who had nowhere to go. And she invited them into our tiny Jackson Heights, Queens apartment. And they then took over every aspect of me. There was a division of labor. One aunt was responsible for education and walking to and from school. Another aunt made 3 meals a day and did all the shopping and all the cleaning. And so I never had a conversation with my mother that went something like, you know, I think it's going to rain today. Maybe you
What
should
would you like for lunch?
wear, galoshes. You know, that nothing like that ever happened. And then once she had that set up for herself, she never so much as washed a glass again, and she kind of came and went from the apartment like a VIP guest that everyone else, including me, just revolved around. And I think what relates her to those women from history is that she owned it. You know, I grew up I was born in the mid-1950s, so June Cleaver was the model mother, and my mother was anything but she didn't hide it. She didn't pretend that she was someone she was not. She owned her, I'll never do that. I don't clean, I don't cook, I don't do any of that. And it became a big part of her persona.
Wow.
Yes. You asked me to pick a scene to read, and that Canzoneri family in their heyday built a resort in upstate New York. And it serves as a backdrop, kind of its heyday and decline in parallel to my mother's own story and my relationship with her. But it was called the Canzoneri Country Club. And it was glamorous for its day. It was in upstate New York in Marlborough. And my mother walked into this scene, and it was quite a scene, as a teenager for a summer job, escaping her own troubled childhood, getting out. And she walked into this world of glamour and vice and sin. Everybody loved to bump up against celebrity in those days. And you know, one thing we didn't talk about is after the book came out, The Hollywood Reporter recommended that it be a movie or a series.
Oh, definitely.
And that resonated with me on a couple of levels. One, because my mother always told me, I could have gone to Hollywood, Debbie. And all that happened when that stunning news came in was just that phrase just looping through my mind, almost as if I was the completion of something for her, because I was so compelled to write this. And as I mentioned, it was a 7-year creative journey of twists and turns and many hills and valleys. And so one of the things with The Hollywood Reporter is I think they're very interested in this world of that country club in and around the early 1940s. It's kind of an untold story about the Italian Alps, the Jewish Alps in upstate New York, known from Dirty Dancing. This book got reviewed as Dirty Dancing meets Goodfellas, which is another clue. So the scene I picked is actually at the second incarnation of that resort, when it sold, and I would go up every summer with the new owners. And my mother would leave me there for the summer with one of my doting fairy godmother aunts. And then my mother would come up on Saturday and visit, and that's the scene. So whenever you want
Go
me to
ahead,
dive in
read it.
now?
Absolutely.
Okay. My hand started waving as soon as I sensed my mother's car about to round the last curve before the hotel. I never failed to anticipate her arrival every summer Saturday, not even once, not even by a second. When she stepped out, I threw my arms around her waist, careful to angle my body back a bit so my bathing suit would not dampen her. A half embrace, but we were together again. Even if her hug wasn't quite as tight as mine, I could tell that she had missed me too. A quick change into one of her Emilio Pucci-inspired sarongs, and then we would trek to the enormous pool with all the other guests. My towel was already on the hill's coarse grass from the morning, and she would join me on it for a few moments so I could cover her back with oil. Then I'd watch as she first glossed her face, then her chest and arms, and finally her legs, slightly raised to reach her arched feet. Even now, the scent of Bain de Soleil transports me to another time and place. Back in the water, I kept one eye on my mother as I swam with all of the other children. Always holding a cigarette aloft, she'd laugh with the friends who orbited her, admirers who vied for proximity, seeking some sort of rub-off effect, or so it seemed to me. She seduced the world, and I was no exception. Once an hour, she'd pin up her tumbling red mane, tie a sheer kerchief around it, and come in for a dip. Everyone knew to stop splashing. She slowly submerged up to her shoulders and began to do her side stroke once around the circumference of the pool. That signature stroke was completely her, effortlessly gliding sideways through life without ever going too deep. After all, leaving the surface would wet her hair. When I was very young, our pool ritual was both a public and private gift. Before or after the side stroking, sometimes before and after on a really great day, my mother would press her body down on the rope that separated the children's side of the pool and slide across. Scooping me up, she'd ease back over to the grown-up side, where it was almost as shallow, but still felt as though you were entering a forbidden zone. She would bend her slippery knees so the water just reached her neck, and I'd climb on to face her, weightless, my little hands, arms, and feet sliding on her shoulders and legs. A smiling pause to build the anticipation, and then she'd begin her bouncing game. Ba-dum, ba-dum, she would sing song, ba-dum, ba-dum, as we bobbed and turned round and round together. Her breath, her closeness, her blue eyes on me as the cool water beaded on our skin was like nothing else. If I close my eyes, I can still feel that joy.
I found this. Deborah revered her characteristic mother, but Dorothy was a woman full of secrets with a troubled past. A mistress of illusion whose love seemed just out of her daughter's grasp. I want to know those secrets.
I'm sorry, there can be no spoilers for LDTV. Read the book in its entirety. I know you've started. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I read that passage, and
yes.
I thought it was so well done in
Thank you.
describing a childhood memory that we all have those that stay with us, especially the ones where you smell certain things, and it brings you back.
You know, people now with book events, and I get to hear what the most common questions are, or comments, and one of them is, you have such a good memory. And I try to explain that writing is really all in the editing. And I rewrote that scene 100 times. And what happens is that the richness of it, the layers of it, come in, and the memories come back as you sit with it kind of day after day. And they're in there for all of us. It's just writers have the advantage, not necessarily of the perfect memory, but of capturing and
in words.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's the talent of writing. I mean, the talent of writing is to be able to think in terms of an idea, and the only thing that you have to work with is words.
Is words.
You don't have clay, you don't have paint, you have words.
And I had to learn a lot. I always had a talent for writing, but it was a different kind of writing.
It is, yeah.
I was a journalism major in school.
Terse, to the point.
You know, I'm wired for the headline.
Right.
And then a lot of my career that you mentioned was spent in marketing. And so again, you're wired for the tagline or the one thing,
the lure,
that's going, exactly,
Sure.
that's going to compel someone to come along for the ride with you. And so if I'm wired that way, I'm wired for a one-page prologue. I'm going to tell you the whole story in a page, but that's not what this world of writing is. And so I had to switch hands or switch the pen.
You do.
And I had to immerse myself in the world of memoir. And of course, I've always been a reader, so the differences of summing up versus unfolding a story and taking the reader with you and showing them. It was a long process.
What was the most useful thing that you pulled out of your toolbox to make that change, to write something so descriptive?
It was actually immersion. I could read. When I decided it was going to be memoir, it started as historical fiction. And I had to learn a lot about that. And then it switched to memoir. And I just went into the world of memoir because I'm a very experiential person. And so I need to feel it. So I read 20 of them.
That's what I was wondering if you were going to come to. It's reading other books.
It's reading, you know, being inspired by good language and brilliant minds.
Right, exactly.
And
the more a writer reads, the better they write.
Sure, it's just being inspired by the way they phrase something.
Yes.
And for me, after about the 20th one, I had that aha moment where it's like, okay, I get it now. And then it was about drafting, and a holdover from my work world is I have an open, collaborative mind. And so at the right point, when the book was 3/4 of the way done, I began to go to workshops. I admired very much, I read about 4 of her memoirs, Dani Shapiro, and I saw that she was teaching a workshop with only 10 students. And I said, I'm going there. So it's, you know, dot and line connecting, and that week with her and those 10 students, was transformative, just in so many ways.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left, believe it or not.
I don't.
And you're not going to tell me any of
no spoilers
of Dorothy's secrets. So I'm going to read 2 reviews.
Okay.
Okay. In her searingly honest memoir, Deborah Burns unpacks what it means to be the daughter of a mistaken for a movie star mother who refuses to be defeated by life, no matter its disappointments. At once painful and uplifting and rich with period detail, you will fall in love with both generations.
Oh.
And the other
That's
one
Sally
that I liked,
Koslow, another brilliant author.
Sally Koslow, yes. With the journalist's eye and a poet's hand, the author conveys the unique texture of her glamorous mother's elusive love. Heartbreaking and hopeful, searing and soulful, Saturday's Child is unputdownable, this generation's terms of endearments, and that's by Megan Foy, author of
Another brilliant author.
Maternity.
Yeah.
Maternity. And you won an award as well.
Yes.
Expectant Mothers?
No, not the Expectant Mothers Award. But yes, it's won two awards and maybe a couple more.
Yeah, it's the
on
Expectant
way.
Mothers Award.
Oh, okay.
I got this.
That's a new one. That's a different one then. I didn't even know about that one. So I do know it's been top in a parenting category on Amazon and a mothering category. So thank you for sharing that. Did not know about that one, but it's won 2 other ones. So
there you go.
So there you go.
So that's a few seconds. Advice to a writer.
Advice to a writer. Think in scenes and get one down and connect them. And that, you know, a lot of people in life, everything feels overwhelming. And writing a book feels super overwhelming. And
So one scene at a time.
One scene at a time.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Linda. I appreciate it.